Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real Texans having real conversations about what's going on in our schools. Today I am thrilled to be joined by history expert Don Frazier. Don is a father of two. He is a former history professor. He is the chair of the 1836 Commission, and he is the director of the Texas Center. Don, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
I don't know how you do it all. There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, a lot of stories to tell about Texas.
That's right. And right now, the big fight is occurring in the State Board of Education as we are watching as they're trying to make a decision on the structure of our history and social studies TEKS.
Sure.
You're at the forefront of pushing what we would call the comprehensive model, which really weaves in history from a broad historical perspective, but also the context and the ideals that have influenced the great state of Texas and made America the greatest country in the world. So I want to go back and talk a little bit about your career as a history professor.
Sure.
And what you saw coming through the doors of your classroom and how that happened.
Well, one thing that I've learned in the course of 4 decades doing this is that more people like cats than like history. So,
oh, boy.
Yeah, so let's start there.
Oh, that's not good.
Well, and it's not good because in order to keep a republic, you need to be an informed and virtuous citizen.
That's right.
And so I think that history is critical to that particular mission. And if you can knock that support, that prop out of our civic development, then all of a sudden you have a population that is essentially historically illiterate, which makes them a lot easier to lead astray because they've got no frame of reference. So that's what I spent the last 4 decades working in that environment. And what I learned over those 40 years was that the students were coming to me just less and less informed and increasingly apathetic about why any of that mattered anyway. I'll tell you a story that really brings this into sharp focus. One time I asked my U.S. History Survey class how many of them would sell their U.S. citizenship for $30,000. Half the room raised their hand. They saw no benefit to being a U.S. citizen.
That is heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. And so I asked these rocket geniuses where they would spend their $30,000. And one guy said, well, I'll take it to Mexico. And I said, well, as soon as somebody figures out that you're 19 years old with $30,000 in your pocket, you're going to end up in a bad way.
You end up dead.
Yeah, hanging upside down from an overpass. And so then next one said, well, I'm going to go to Germany. Best standard of living on earth. And I said, great, that $30,000 will last you about 6 months, and then you'll figure out what their social welfare system looks like. And then third guy said, well, I'll go to Egypt. And that was so out of left field. I said, all right, everybody stop what you're doing, pull out your phones, pull out your tablets, and go to a website called wherecanidrinkthewater.com. And just see where on planet Earth you can just turn on the tap and drink the water. And these kids were stunned. They were absolutely gobsmacked that you couldn't go to Russia, for instance, for most of Russia, and turn on the faucet and get a glass of water. You certainly can't do that in Egypt. And so that's when I started to figure out these kids have no context for their own modern life. And things that we take for granted here have a larger story, a larger context that they need to understand, or they're not going to be fully educated. So that's what I can tell you from the front. This is my lived experience.
It's wild. And so this is wild. You talking about Egypt of where you could drink the water. I went to Egypt for a very brief period of time.
Yeah.
And I didn't drink the water, but I ate in a restaurant and ended up in the hospital for 3 days.
You bet.
So, and that really, when you said it, I was like, yep,
yeah,
that really
I know all
happens.
about that, yeah.
Don, how did this happen?
Well, I would say that this is all the fruits of the last 40 years worth of education policy, that ultimately we ceded control over that process to people that had a particular agenda. And that agenda was wrapped up in this sort of idea of we need to be inclusive and multicultural and things like that. And who could be against that? I mean, the third most spoken language in Texas today is Vietnamese. So multiculturalism comes at you whether you like it or not. So I get that. Like that whole idea about multiculturalism. But when tested, you figured out that multiculturalism didn't mean all cultures were welcome. And so I actually had a student from Austin, the capital of our fair state, and she went up to my classroom in Abilene. And I said, well, how do you like it here in Abilene? She said, well, I'm from Austin. And down in Austin, we are taught to be very inclusive and multicultural, not like all these backward rednecks in Abilene.
Oh.
So I stopped and I said, so let me get this straight. Your great big table that has a seat for everybody does not have a seat for backward rednecks. So you're not really multicultural. You're actually about pushing a different sort of agenda than what you say you are. And that's kind of what has happened in this process is language has ceased to have meaning and words have been convoluted and packaging has occurred. So in 1990, I'm in graduate school. My major professor at TCU wrote an article called What's Wrong with History? And he said, nothing's wrong with history. History's right where we left it. It's the practitioners that are coming in to do this in the institutions of higher learning that are manipulating it towards a particular goal. And he predicted back in 1990 that we would be exactly where we are today. So there's a timeline and there's a genealogy of thought that has gone into this process.
That's right. And what you're talking about is the long march through the institutions. And that was where you had radical Marxists who came out of radical leftist schools, the Frankfurt schools, specifically Herbert Marcuse.
Okay.
The Nazis were not doing socialism right, right? Because they always, if you just do it this way, forget human nature, make us robots. If you would just do it this way, we could all live in harmony. That's kind of their mentality. And he came to UC Irvine and became a professor and then realized that the proletariat was not going to rise up in revolution because actually America is amazing.
Yeah.
People turn on the faucet, they get a drink of water.
It takes a lot of effort to throw a revolution. And, you know, most people like their jobs
they like
their mortgage. And,
That's right. They like their kids going to school. They can turn on the water and drink. They can turn on the water and get hot water coming out.
Correct.
I mean, Americans lived great. And so he partnered with a young radical student, you know, before he had ever paid taxes or tried to raise a family or purchase a house or anything, named Rudy Duchka. And they came up with the idea, if we can't get the workers to become revolutionaries, we will infiltrate the thought-leading institutions. We will change the way our colleges of education, colleges of history, colleges of medical schools, all of this. We will infiltrate them with our ideas, and this will trickle down to all of the universities, and this will trickle down into the K through 12 system. We'll change the pedagogy, we'll change the curriculum, and all of this, and that is our revolution. So we right now are living through a cultural revolution.
In slow motion.
In slow motion.
You bet.
And it's because our kids, they don't know. They don't know that right now, even people, you know, in government subsidized housing that can turn on the faucets or get hot water, you didn't have that in America 100 plus years ago.
Correct.
You still don't have it in most places in the world.
Correct.
So that's what's gone on, right?
They've been boiling a frog. That's the old analogy.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. I love that. They're boiling the frog, and the frog has not jumped out of the pot yet.
That's right. But we've got an opportunity right now to finally jump out of that pot.
That's right.
And so I've been watching this throughout the course of my career. And, you know, it's no mystery that 90% of academics identify with the left.
Right.
And it's no mystery that there's really 9 universities across the U.S. that produce about 85 to 90% of our faculty at universities. And so there has been a choke point created. Now, anybody in Texas that has ever worked cattle understands the purpose of a squeeze chute.
That's right.
And our institutions of education and higher learning are the squeeze chutes. And they're also where culture gets made. And so what you're doing is you're squeezing them into those squeeze chutes, you're doctoring them up, cropping their ears, giving them, all the various vaccinations, and then shipping them out as you would like them to be shipped out.
Right.
And so this squeeze chute phenomena has certainly been the case for a long time. So the students that I got just had no context for anything. They knew what they knew because that's what teacher told them.
Right. So let's get into an example. They knew what they knew. Right now, the diversity and equity inclusion nonsense that's been crammed down our throats for decades.
That's just the most recent label.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. And they'll come up with some other euphemisms to dress it up and, try and put lipstick on that pig. But let's talk about the issue that people get very uncomfortable about. And with the divisiveness that is crammed into our kids right now, because we've got privilege walks that occur at schools. We have, banned critical race theory teaching. We banned DEI. We're trying to ban all this stuff from a legislative level, and they just figure out a way around it, right? So right now, slavery is an issue that children do not understand. There's many kids that think that somehow America created slavery.
Sure.
And they don't understand that we're the good guys in the story, that slavery has existed since the beginning of time.
Sure.
And that it was the Judeo-Christian values, specifically William Wilberforce there in Parliament in the UK, who fought to end the transatlantic slave trade there. And then we followed shortly thereafter.
Sure, kicking and screaming. I mean, when you say we're the good guys, we were reluctant good guys.
But we got there.
Yeah, at the point of a bayonet. But yeah, we got there.
We got there.
Yeah.
I think it's important that kids, so talk about the context of what we're talking about in the world and why it's important that freedom, the freedoms that we all enjoy, the promises made in the Declaration of Independence that all men were created equal.
You bet.
All of that played into how we got here.
So here's the question I have for you. Why would anybody own a slave?
Financial reasons.
All right. Ultimately, there's got to be an economic reason.
Correct.
And if you don't explain that economic machine that creates the entire slave industry, then all of a sudden it gets framed in terms of race.
Right.
That the only reason we have slaves is because we hate people of a particular background. And it's all about hate.
Right.
And it's all about oppression. When actually it's about free enterprise playing within the rules as they existed at the time.
Right.
All right, so the reason that people don't understand the full context of slavery is because we handle it episodically. So we handle slavery, then it ends at the Civil War, and then we pick it up again with civil rights.
You say we. I want to make sure that we're talking about it in our current system of educating our kids.
Correct.
We're doing it episodically. We are telling them facts and figures, dates and people, but there is no context around it.
There is no narrative arc.
Right.
So we lose the plot,
yes,
if you will. And history is treated kind of in silos. And so we have slavery's over here, then it ends, Civil War, point of the bayonet, hey, emancipation happens.
Right.
And then we fast forward through World War II and stuff like that. African Americans kind of disappear from the story in all of that. We got a little Harlem Renaissance and the Great Migration, and then we have civil rights. But there is a complete context that's lacking. And so civil rights is us pushing back against oppressors, and slavery is all about we just don't like these people, so we're going to enslave them.
Right.
And what they're missing is part and parcel of the American experience. You know, if you take a look at the Constitution, and actually I went through the Constitution line by line and did a riff on each line back in my career. It is as much a commercial document as it is an economic a political document. So it's got as much about economics in it as it does about politics. So what were these people doing in 1776? They were forming a nation where you could pursue your happiness.
Right.
And part of that pursuing your happiness was owning stuff and the ability to accumulate wealth. All right, so if you put that context into the question of slavery, then all of a sudden does it make sense to own slaves? Well, it does from an economic standpoint if you're trying to increase your revenues and your productivity and you have a labor shortage. So then all of a sudden slavery's like, well, it's an ugly and terrible institution, but I understand the profit motive behind it. And so people have focused on, I mean, the current sort of treatment of slavery, for instance, since you brought it up, has been wrapped up in race issues while ignoring anything else out there that contextualizes that entire process. And that's kind of symptomatic of how we approach the historical conversation.
Right. So we're talking about the abhorrent practice of slavery, and thank God that we joined our sisters across the pond and ended it, while people still are enslaved today.
Sure. Slavery is more prevalent today than it has been historically.
And that is part of the context, right? Is when you're talking about Texas, you're talking about America, and we have to talk about the world and what went on for millennia.
Correct.
Since the beginning of time immemorial.
It's in the Bible.
It's right. Yeah. So we have to talk about why. And that's important, because if our kids don't know why something occurred, then they can't, especially for the evils of slavery, they can't ensure it doesn't ever happen again.
Well, I mean, it's the 3-year-old's question. But why?
Why?
I mean, that's what your kids are always asking you. But why? And when we put them in public school, they can't ask why anymore.
They're just given the facts and the figures.
Yep, facts and figures, names and dates. And so when I get them as freshmen in college, they don't like history.
Right.
Because it was boring.
It's boring. Because you don't get the full story and understand how things happened and why it happened.
Yep.
And ultimately, for the thousands of years of history that people existed and setting up civilizations and setting up countries and setting everything
up,
all of it, you've got to tell that whole story and how other countries and their practices and their culture affects decisions that were made in America, decisions that were made in Texas, decisions that are made at their local level.
You bet.
It all is intertwined.
All of history is connected.
Right.
So if you think about history as playing out genealogies of ideas, America was not, did not spring from the forehead of Zeus just spontaneously one day, which is a reference that none of my students would get. But Americans, as immigrants from other places, brought a toolkit in their skull. Mm-hmm. Books they've read, experiences they'd had, and what they crafted was a uniquely American expression of the human condition, the human experience, in an attempt to encourage human flourishing. All right. So in order to understand the American context, you've got to understand the British context, the Spanish context. You've got to understand the indigenous context, because without natives in the Americas, you've got no American history. So then once you get your arms around the Spanish and the British, English in particular, Scottish as well, which is often overlooked, and indigenous mindsets, then what were their influences? And so next thing you know, you're going all the way back to places like Rome and Athens and Jerusalem. And to understand how culture is formed over time is critical. And it's very tough to do when you teach history in silos.
That's right.
If you do it as a narrative arc, all of a sudden you see the processes and how it builds on itself.
And that's 100% correct. And that is why we want to see the structure of the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills that's being taught to our kindergarten through 8th graders is that narrative arc, is that comprehensive method that includes all of it. And so while they're getting repetition in the narratives and the themes, it all ties together. It's like a story. It's like the family stories where that we can go back and talk about what, Uncle Bob did at Christmas, whatever, and why he did it. Did he have too much eggnog?
The fish was this big. No, it was that big.
That's right. Our kids can understand that story. And that story is so important because what we are seeing, what you saw, what we are all seeing throughout society is our young people, the next generation of Texans that are going to have to ensure that they should want to ensure that we maintain our freedoms, that we are still prosperous, that we still have the rights for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and not having a tyrannical government, a communist government come in and take over. They don't understand the context of why we are where we are and why we have the freedoms that we have that, quite frankly, the majority of the world does not have.
They don't. They have no frame of reference for that, and nobody clued them in on that.
That's right.
Nobody gave them the context.
Nobody gave them the context, and that's why we need the comprehensive model in this TEAK structure, is because it is the whole context, it is the whole picture of why things occurred and how American exceptionalism is unique.
Correct. And so the current TEKS are a mile wide and an inch deep. I mean, I got a very close view of them in 2022 when I was content advisor for the process then. And the siloed approach is guaranteed to create people that don't like history very much, primarily because they can't figure out how 8th grade related to 5th grade related to 3rd grade. And by the way, there's intervening years where they have zero social studies at all. Yeah. So the attempt to create retained learning just vanishes.
Right.
And so it's about retained learning across from grade to grade to grade. So one proposal is the repetitive model, where you do 3 years and then rinse and repeat another 3 years. To me, that's just siloing a different way. Now, what I'm really interested in seeing emerge from all of this process is the integration of U.S., world, and local, because ultimately the school kids of Texas look out a classroom window, and what they're looking at is a playground with mesquite trees in it, and that's not in Illinois. That's not in Massachusetts. That's in Texas. So they kind of need to understand the context of that playground with the mesquite trees. All right, that's my West Texas background showing up. But that repetitive model seems to me that it does everything the current TEKS does now poorly, except it also eliminates a single year of Texas history.
That's right. And when you talk about poorly, to be clear for our viewers, on the state testing, on the STAR exam, just 30% of 8th graders are proficient in history.
That's not a win.
That is a fail. There is no way
Let's imagine we're teaching a swimming class, and only 30% of the kids make it across the pool. Yeah,
no, that is absolute failure. So 30% of our kids, which explains a lot in our culture right now.
Does.
To be clear, this is why this is so important, is being able to, kids need to understand America, where she came from, why she was formed, so they can love her and appreciate her and want to protect her in the future. Because Xi Jinping and Putin and a whole lot of other lunatics across the world would love nothing more than to indoctrinate our kids with radical ideas that totalitarian dictators that are presidents for life, or that communism is somehow good. That's what they are trying to do. And that's why kids need to understand our greatness. But you have to know where we came from.
Well, but living in the United States is hard. And the reason it's hard is because you have to be bold, and you have to be willing to take chances, and you have to be willing to not be kept.
Yes.
All right, so 2 things drive this home for me. I've had students that would prefer not to make decisions about their lives. I've had those in my class before. In fact, very similar exercise that I did in a college classroom, I had them pull up current events, and we'd riff on them. And one of them was that there's a shortage of cocoa being produced in West Africa. And part of it was a labor shortage. So some of the big chocolate companies were providing company housing, company clothes, company food, putting them in these long barracks or little huts or maybe even cabins. Problem was they had labor contracts that kept them there essentially for life. And I said, so who all here would think that sounds like a great idea? And there was a couple of African-American students that raised their hands and said, I think that sounds like great. It's, guaranteed employment for life. And I said, you guys need to sit back and think about what you just said, because this country went through a war to abolish that system.
Right. So you could be free.
Correct. And there they were saying, hey, man, we would rather live essentially in a kept situation as they saw it.
That's because they've never done it.
Because they've never done it. They have no context, and they don't understand how you go from 1865 to a modern cocoa plantation in Ghana.
Right.
And what that string would look like. Okay. So that is part of the landscape that we're dealing with, as you suggest.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those stories and to explain the context, because kids don't know. They don't understand that in that barracks, if you're there for life, you're there for life. You're essentially an indentured servant. You're not ever, able to take the vacation with your kids that you can save up for a year. You're not able to go back to school and learn new things. You're not able to pursue your dream with this genius idea that you've come up with.
Correct.
None of that. You're there forever doing the same thing.
That's right.
You're an indentured servant.
Yeah, and welcome to a drudgery life.
Yeah.
And so back to America being tough to live in, capitalism rewards risk takers, but you got to be a risk taker. Mm-hmm. And not everybody's comfortable being a risk taker. And so there are people that, in good conscience, look me in the eye and say, capitalism is what's wrong with this country. And what's remarkable to me is that the people telling me this are in the financial services industry. And I'm going, so let me get this straight. You're helping people manage the money that capitalism helped grow, mm-hmm. and you find capitalism to be the problem with this country. And they just don't know what they're talking about.
Right. They don't. Well, and that's really, really important and horrifying. So I would say crony capitalism is a problem that we have to address 100%. But capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty.
You bet. Especially risk takers.
Hundreds of millions. Yeah. Yes, but the risk takers employ people.
Correct.
You don't have to be a risk taker. You can go and hopefully get a good education.
Sure.
Get a, trade certification. Go, whatever. You don't necessarily have to be the risk taker. You can go work for the risk takers.
Correct.
And still make a great living and be able to provide for your family, be able to buy a home that has cold running water that comes out, or hot waters for your showers, or clothes for your kids. You actually, so I understand what you're saying. We can massively reward risk takers.
Correct.
But we also, anyone that is willing to work, they can have a wonderful, purposeful life where they're free to choose. Maybe you don't want to work as hard and you like your hobbies, or you like spending more time outdoors, or you whatever it is. You get that choice.
Well, and I would argue that in your scenario, somebody that went to school or trade school or whatever else, the decision to follow that path is a risk.
Fair enough. Okay, if you're putting it that.
Now, if you were assigned a job in 12th grade,
right,
and that was going to be your job forever, that's the opposite of risk-taking.
That's right.
There are decision trees that everybody comes to in their lives. Your kids, my kids, and they've either got to go right or they got to go left.
Okay.
There are some people that think a better system would be one without decision trees.
And they've never gone to China.
And they've never gone
that's the point, is when we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party, which controls everything, that is what happens. It not only happens with what you're doing in life. In fact, I studied abroad in China when I was in college. And I remember, we were in Beijing for a while, and it's the city that you see all the pictures of and the bright lights. But then we traveled around to more rural areas.
Sure.
And I vividly remember my professor, who had already explained how he had the blessing to get to come to America to be a professor. And what I now know is he still had, obviously, family back at home, parents, whatever. He was there, but he had to a great degree, toe the party line.
You bet.
Literally, the Communist Party line.
Correct.
But he knew, he took some chances and whatnot with explaining how things work. But when we talk about exactly what you're saying, I remember there was these people that just had, those janitorial dust buckets, and that they have a stick and you put them down and they flop down and you sweep up. Yeah. And on the streets you saw them, and I had asked a question. He said that's their job forever. They didn't do well on their exams. They were average, whatever. That is the job that the government gave them forever, to walk around the streets and sweep up mostly dust. Maybe there was some debris, but it was in most of the areas it was fairly clean, because you would be severely punished, obviously, if you were littering. And that's what kids don't understand, that could be your job. Or when they implemented the one-child policy, and people were literally killing their daughters which has created a whole crisis, or they were literally killing their second babies, or I mean, all of this is what happens when you have no risk and you have no choices.
No choices. And so you got to ask yourself, why?
Yeah.
Why would anybody think that was better than?
And they wouldn't, not if they'd ever been there.
Not if they'd been there.
So let's dig into that a little bit more, because I do think the communist angle, thankfully the legislature here in the 89th legislative session passed SB 24, which mandated the teaching of the horrors of communism.
Sure.
So thank God they've passed that. But now in this teach structure, it has to be in there.
Yeah.
Now this is mandated by law. And let's talk a little bit about why the comprehensive structure, where that we're telling the full picture of the evils. Let's talk about the evils of communism and how that has to be woven into the comprehensive TEKS structure that we need the SBOE to pass.
Okay. Well, let me take you to the hill country, because communism has a hill country connection.
Let's hear it.
All right. So 1848, we've got revolutions going on all over Europe. And these revolutions are sparked in part by the writings of a political philosopher named Karl Marx. And Karl Marx said, if we can tear everything down, then from the chaos, we will build these utopian societies. Now, he's saying this from the comfort of a salon,
right,
and not out on the streets or on the barricades. But some of the people that were influenced by those writings said, you know what? Government and the church are the two big evils. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to go to some place that has very little government and no influence from the church. And a bunch of them ended up choosing Texas. And so they came out here and they ended up having settlements in Sisterdale and Comfort, and they were called freethinkers. Okay. So that Karl Marx impulse that introduces the idea of communism through his Communist Manifesto, mm-hmm, ends up having this connection with a very local Texas connection that without a comprehensive model would probably get lost. All right. So without understanding the roots of communism, mm-hmm, then you don't understand what's going on in 1917 in Russia. And without understanding what's going on in 1917 in Russia.
And who was the leader? Lay it out.
Yeah, we got to understand Lenin. There's a very nice stainless steel sculpture of Lenin's head on display in downtown San Antonio right now. It's back in an alley and it's kind of out of the way, but the fact that,
Yikes.
We've got Lenin still in public places in the U.S. is kind of...
That's crazy.
Well, it's indicative of kind of where we are because people don't understand. And once you get the Russians embracing communism, then communism becomes a human murder factory.
How many people did he murder?
I don't even know.
Figures, right. We don't know.
We're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions.
Starving them to death, working them to death, torturing them to death.
You figure out pretty soon how come Russians and Ukrainians don't get along, mm-hmm, because the Russians stole the Ukrainian food and let them starve in the Holodomor. Mm-hmm. And so it is... all of a sudden you contextualize this stuff, then it goes all the way back to this bearded German thinker named Karl Marx. But you got to be able to see where that goes awry. Right. Some people say, well, communism in its pure form works. I said, well, show me where it worked. Yeah, just show me where it worked. So if it's not the Russians killing people in the name of communism or state control, then it's the Chinese that are killing them.
And what happened with the Chinese?
Yeah, same sort of deal. We have, China's a basket case, a failed state. Everybody's picking at it. And then finally, one day, the communism takes hold as being perhaps the solution. And you have this Chinese civil war that puts it extraordinarily vulnerable to Japanese invasion. Well, you've got to be able to contextualize that.
Right.
Otherwise, people are looking at Japan invading China in a world history class, and they don't understand that this goes way back.
Right.
And here's how we go from point A to point B to get to this part of the story. So, ultimately, if you didn't toe the party line,
you
got whacked.
That's it. Mao came in And
Yeah.
he too murdered somewhere
bet.
between 40 and probably 80 million people.
And destroyed the culture.
Yes.
And said, you know what, any vestige of the old China needs to be stamped out. So if you're a composer, or if you're a painter, or if you're a writer, you're going to re-education camp, and we're going to put a dunce cap on your head, and we're going to parade you through town and let everybody throw rotten produce at you and talk about what an evil, terrible person you are because you're anti-revolutionary.
Yeah.
And that story needs to be told.
It has to be told.
The veil between civilization and this sort of chaos is gossamer thin, and that's what our students don't understand because it's been siloed to them.
Yes, that's it, is that context and why the comprehensive model is so important, because and we can draw all of that talking about, so we've talked about Karl Marx.
Yep.
And his philosophies written from a studio, while his partner's father, Engel, his father, that was a rich capitalist, by the way, who funded all of this nonsense for him to write and put out, that influenced Antonio Gramsci, another communist in Italy, that influenced Herbert Marcuse before he came to America. And obviously, Marx influenced Mao, that murdered millions.
Sure.
Lenin and Marx were Mao's like idols. And there has been marches back in the 70s, and this is really important, on our college campuses, where students were literally carrying banners and chanting Mao, Marx, Marcuse.
Yeah.
All of that is woven into our story, and kids have to understand the evils that have occurred with that philosophy, but also, again, that greatness and the freedom-loving Americans and Texans that fought against that and have delivered the system, while not perfect, no system is perfect. We're humans, we're human beings, but that we have today.
Well, I mean, capitalism killed a lot of people too, and exploited a lot of people too. So you have to be able to compare and contrast the two, and then make up your mind.
Yep.
I mean, ultimately, education needs to be about a level playing field and an honest conversation. What I have seen happen over the course of 40 years is we've decided not to have honest conversations.
Yeah.
And so if you think capitalism's bad, all right, let's compare it to something. So let's compare it to communism and see how these both played out. And then you have to choose from these two systems,
right,
with all their flaws,
right,
and all of their high and lofty ideals, and pick which one you think suits your lifestyle better.
Right.
But right now, that they're not given that option. They're just kind of told a story, and that's what's on the test, and move on down the
And then they don't like it. They don't care. They don't find it interesting. And history is fascinating.
Because it's just like you and I talking here, or me going down the street. History is everyday people doing everyday things that, taken cumulatively in a comprehensive way,
that's right,
leads to the story.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for all the incredible work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So I want our viewers to know that you have put together 250 videos. I call them, they're kind of PragerU style, but awesome history videos tying in, integrating all of the where Texas fits within America, within the world, and how everything interlaps, is interconnected, the world that we live in. So where can our viewers go and find these videos?
So you're looking for, our project's name is E Pluribus Texas, out of many Texas.
Yes.
And it really speaks to the fact that there's a lot of influences that made us who we are. Think about the emerging demographics of Texas. How many kids whose parentage or ancestry comes from south of the Rio Grande understand even the context of their own heritage? And chances are it's pretty slim. So we have integrated not only world history, but also Mexican history to a very large degree with U.S. history, and talking about where the ideals that get planted and proofed in Texas come from. And so each video is about 5 minutes long. And we start with the beginning of time, go all the way to present, and create that narrative arc. So E Pluribus Texas, find it on YouTube, and you can find it on Vimeo. You can find it on the Texas Center website shortly. I've actually got a couple of meetings about that coming up, and we will then craft a curriculum that goes with it. So what is useful, the reason we took this approach is because we didn't see that approach being taken in public schools.
Right.
And we focused on Texas in particular because Texas history is not tested. As a result, it is often given to teachers whose priorities may be some other field. I mean, the old joke, and it's not fair, but it sometimes rings true. So I can't remember who taught me Texas history, but his first name was Coach. All right. So
yeah, that does happen.
In his defense, Coach didn't get that class until 2 weeks before he had to teach it. And his background was in chemistry. But because of the way things were shifted around and he's really good at coaching baseball, he has to do something. They threw him over in Texas history because it's not tested. So therefore, if he doesn't do a good job, it won't look bad for the school.
Yep.
So that said, we're really riding to his rescue. And the reason it's important is that we want Coach Pringle to be able to teach a course where his students emerge educated instead of just kept.
Yep.
And he'll learn something, they'll learn something, Texas will be better for it. I'm unashamedly a believer that Texas is the best expression of the American idea. I think that this is the place that the framers had in mind in 1776. They just hadn't met the place yet.
That's right.
All right. So that said, what I like back to the TEKS framework, the reason I like that comprehensive framework is because the repetition, the review, all gets done in a Texas context.
Yeah.
So this is how all these big trends, these big themes, all get together and create Texas. So E Pluribus Texas, it's available free to the public. I mean, we had generous backers from all over the state. People have thrown in on this project. They think it's important. And, it's useful for newcomers to the state, too. Texas is a complicated place with a very complicated past, but it is an inspiring past.
Yes.
And so that's what we've done, and it's our gift to the world.
It's wonderful. And I told you last night in preparation for this podcast, I was listening to several of them as I was preparing dinner, and my 8-year-old came in and she was listening to them with me and thought it was really awesome. So cool. Even, children in elementary school, the way that you all have crafted it is it's understandable because it's the full picture. It tells a narrative instead of just facts and figures. And so I'm grateful to you for all of that effort that you have put into it and for all of the backers that help put that out there and helping to understand that arc of history that we need to be educating our children with in our public school system so they can know America and they can love her and want to protect her and our freedoms that we enjoy today. Before we wrap up, please look in that camera right now. I know that as the chair of the 1836 Commission, you all are supporting option 3, the comprehensive model that has the capstone year of Texas history.
Correct.
Talk to the patriots of Texas, talk to the leaders of Texas, and tell them why it is so important that we get the social studies history TEKS, their structure right. Tell them why it's so important that we tell the full story of history from world to U.S. to Texas, and why it is so important that we have that standalone capstone year of Texas history for our students.
Perfect. I'll look at the camera and say it with a clear eye. This is your story. This is our story collectively. Doesn't matter where you come from, Lower Rio Grande Valley, Upper Panhandle, Piney Woods, or the Trans-Pecos. Texas is your context, and it's your story. But you have to understand that context on how Texas, where it came from, what the forces were in across the planet, across the nation, that ended up manifesting itself into this experience. And we think that approach, that comprehensive approach with that capstone Texas course is the answer. We think that's probably the best framework we've seen in a long time. So when we just held our quarterly meeting of the 1836 committee, and we voted unanimously that was the approach to take. So I hope that the decision makers in the state, hear us and pay attention to our opinion, because we think this is the right way to go.
Don, thank you for incredible work that you have done at the Texas Center in educating those young minds in college. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin, and now you have the power.